we can hopefully start now. Okay, yeah, perfect. Hello, students and teachers. Welcome to the first online event with Tom Franklin, author of the best-selling novel, Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter. My name is Sophia Kumla and I work for the d.a.i. Tübingen, and I will make sure that hopefully everything runs smoothly and without any technical difficulties. Today's event is hosted by the 4 German-American institutes in Baden-Württemberg, namely the d.a.i. Heidelberg, the Karl-Schurz-Haus Freiburg, the DATS Stuttgart, and the d.a.i. Tübingen. If someone has not heard of us yet, the d.a.i.s are independent cultural and educational institutions that have made it their mission to provide information about the US and German-American relations. And for this purpose, each institute organizes various events which contributes to a better understanding of the ideals, values, and culture of both countries. In addition, I would like to briefly draw your attention to the various programs designed for you, teachers and students. All 4 institutes have an English-speaking library as well as e-library, offer teacher trainings, multiple language courses or summer camps, and they have individual school projects such as Rent an American or America Explained. And lastly, I would like to point out the d.a.i. Tübingen's youth trip to San Diego this summer for students between 15 and 19-year-olds. You can go travel with me for 3 weeks to California, beautiful San Diego. Check out our websites. You can find all the links below in the info box, and of course, social media to see what's offered near you. And now to today's event. I am very happy that Tom Franklin agreed to do another online reading tour. If you have questions for Tom, please feel free to write them in the YouTube chat and he will try to answer them later. And now it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to today's 2 main speakers. Firstly, of course, our guest of honor, Tom Franklin. And secondly, I'm also happy to introduce you to Miss Inge Strass. She's the department head of the Seminar für Ausbildung und Fortbildung der Lehrkräfte Tübingen for English. And she also teaches at the Wildermuth Gymnasium in Tübingen. And thank you both for being here with us today. And I hand it over to you now. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone here in Germany, and good morning again to you in Mississippi, Tom. As Sophia Kumla has already said, I'm a former teacher, actually, a former teacher at Wildermuth Gymnasium and teacher trainer. And I have the great pleasure to guide you through today's event. We will hear Tom Franklin, who has joined us from his home in Oxford, Mississippi. And he will talk about his novel, Crooked Letter, and also answer your questions, which of course you can submit. And we already have lots of submitted questions from various courses all over Baden-Württemberg by students just like you who read the novel for the upcoming Abitur. First, let me say a few words about our renowned guest, Tom Franklin, and set the stage for his talk. He was born and raised and educated in a small town in the US South. He is called a crime writer, but he doesn't just write crime fiction. He also wrote short stories, other novels, and he even writes novels not just alone, but together with his wife, poet Beth and Fennelly. He co-wrote a novel, The Tilted World, great novel. And this has been praised as, or the 2 of them have been praised as being the king and queen of contemporary Southern literature. Some people call Tom a regional writer, but I'm sure that doesn't really fit. He doesn't just cover the US South. He's won lots of prizes. Suffice it to mention just a few, which he won for Crooked Letter. The novel was a New York Times bestseller. It won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, received the Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction, the RT Reviewers' Choice Award for Best Contemporary Mystery, and the UK Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger Award. So not just British, American prizes, but also a British prize. Tom presently is a professor of fiction writing at the University of Mississippi, where he teaches creative writing to students who want to become writers, probably. But it's not this list of books and prizes that will make today's event memorable to us, but Tom's gift of storytelling, even spontaneous storytelling, of capturing our attention while doing so. This way, it's easier for us to relate to his work and his life. Maybe we find things we share, which we have in common, or also questions that bewilder us. For me personally, the thing we share is growing up in a small village or a town where everybody knows everybody else, and where you have this strong sense of belonging, much more so than in a big city, but only if you fit in, where, however, life can be very harsh and difficult if you don't fit in, if you're the one person, the one outsider, the outcast, or the weirdo. So I feel I have something in common there, yet in my case, a small village was in Bavaria, a very homogeneous society. In Tom's case, the village or town was in southern Alabama, and the setup of society there was quite different from mine. It was half white and half black. So possibly it was quite different to grow up there. And I find it challenging to relate to this. But luckily, there are books like Crooked Letter, which portray small town life to help me imagine what it may have been like. Still, there is the cultural gap between here and there. And I suppose most of you feel that gap as well. And sometimes when reading, we become aware of this gap, but sometimes we don't. And that often leads to misunderstandings, to misjudgments about characters, development, and what's going on. Now, becoming aware of such cultural gaps and differences and bridging the gaps in our understanding, that is the aim of an event like this, where we can ask our questions and find out what the differences are. So let's see similarities, become aware of cultural differences, and bridge those gaps. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Tom Franklin, who I'm sure will enlighten us and entertain us all. And perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about the setup of society in the South, in your novel as well.
Sure. And thank you both, Sophia and Inga, for having me. And I want to thank the d.a.i. for sponsoring this event. That organization has been it's such a wonderful thing, and I hope that you take advantage of it. It is truly remarkable. I've been there. I visited those amazing, remarkable cities, and I've been into the facilities, and it's just a good thing that I hope y'all will explore. So, yeah, I grew up in Dickinson, Alabama. I brought a picture. I think I'll try to show it. See how this works.
Oh, okay. I can see a railway line.
Yes.
And two boys.
This is me walking on the railroad track in Dickinson. That's my brother behind me. Yeah. Behind him is my cousin. You can't quite see him, but you see how green it was. Dickinson was a very small place, population 300. And as Inga said, about half white and half black. There were two churches, both Baptist. Most of the churches in my part of the country are Baptist. And there was one where white people went and one where black people went. In a world that, that is increasingly desegregated, I found and have found still that religion is a place where Black people still want to be away from white people, and I don't blame them. But Dickinson was a hamlet, which simply means it was a crossroads. It had a crossroads store, and it had a railroad track. The track I just showed you, that track ran right behind the store, but the train did not stop there. About 50 years ago, it would stop. Dickinson was a stop on the rail line, but not anymore. Now the train goes right by, and the community of Dickinson is not, to my mind, as wonderful as it used to be. Now there are a lot of drugs, and those trees that I showed you are all cut down for lumber. So it's not as wooded and shady as it once was. It's now populated with cheap, fast-growing trees like loblolly pine trees. They cut down the good trees, the hardwoods, and replace them with trees that grow fast, so it produces more lumber. And this makes me sad whenever I visit. But I think a lot of places are like that, and no place is like you remember it, especially if those memories are long. But it was a good place to have grown up if one became a writer, as I did. And many of the details, many of the observations in Crooked Letter came from my own background. I talked about this a bit, but I wrote most of Crooked Letter in Brazil, which is a curious place to write a novel set in Mississippi. I'll interrupt myself to say that in my mind, when I was writing it, it was set in Alabama, in my own community of Dickinson. Only when I decided to call the book Crooked Letter did I slide it all east to Mississippi, because that's a very Mississippi title. It's how children are taught to spell Mississippi. M-I, crooked letter I, crooked letter I, humpback I. So crooked letters are S's, humpbacks are P's. And this is how we're taught to spell that sing-songy, very difficult word, Mississippi. But once I decided to call it that, it became, I said it in Mississippi, but in my heart, in my head, when I see it, I still see my hometown, my home community of Dickinson. And I think I interrupted myself, but just to say that it was a good place to have been raised if you were a writer. It's a good place to have left and a hard place to return. But I did write most of this book in Brazil, as I was saying. My wife, who's a poet, the former poet laureate of Mississippi, was granted a Fulbright grant. This means that she's given money to fly her and her whole family and live in another country for a semester. So we went to Brazil because she wanted to study the poet Elizabeth Bishop, who spent about 10 years in Brazil. And so we went to a town called Belo Horizonte, which means beautiful horizon in Portuguese. And we stayed in this wonderful 12-story condo in the middle of this city. And down there, I would go every day to the pool by the condo and work on my novel, Crooked Letter. No one was at the pool because it was, people were working and kids were in school. So I had privacy. And as I sat there, I had maybe about 50 pages of this novel, and I needed to, it was about already a couple of years overdue. So I really needed to get some work done in Brazil. And as I sat down and tried to write, I realized I was in trouble because I was writing about the American South, but I was in South America. And everything that I knew, everything I wanted to put into my novel, the trees, the plants, the bushes, the birds, everything was different in Brazil, different trees, plants, bushes, birds. And so I didn't know what to do. Normally, when I'm writing something, I take walks in the woods, and something I'll see will activate my imagination, and I'll go back to my computer at my desk, and I'll write about the spider web that I saw, the jewel spider that I saw. Or I'll write about how these lichen were growing on the side of a pin oak tree, and they looked like small shelves. Something in the real world would begin to create a scene for me that I could write. And if I have a place on, on my computer, I have people that can walk through it. But down in Brazil, everything was different. And I felt a kind of panic. And so for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I didn't write anything. I just read books and felt bad about myself and began to be more and more desperate. But then something strange began to happen. I did start to write, but I was writing entirely from memory. I was not getting any kind of sensory input for the book. And so as I began to write from memory, a surprising thing happened. I began to write about myself, and I began to write an autobiographical novel, a novel based on the writer's biography, writing it oneself. And suddenly the character of Laureate and the writer, Tommy Franklin, were getting more and more and more alike. And things that had happened to me in my history began to happen to Laureate unexpectedly. For example, one year, the bus system in Alabama got messed up, and no bus came to our house, no school bus, I mean, to take us to school in the mornings. Typically, a bus, went all in these rural roads, the dirt roads, the gravel roads, and picked up children who couldn't get to school otherwise. But that year, my father had to drive my sister and brother and me to school every morning. We would leave at about 7 o'clock, 7 a.m. And the time I'm remembering, it was really, really cold. It can get very cold in Alabama. It was in the 20s Fahrenheit. And we all got into my father's truck, a big Ford F-150. My father driving, my sister beside him, my little brother, and then me, 4 of us across one long bench seat. And he would drive us to school. And in the afternoons, our mother would pick us up. Well, the time I'm thinking about, we got in my dad's truck and we drove toward school. And as we turned at the sharp bend where the store was and where the railroad tracks were, the railroad tracks that I showed you, there was a Black woman and her daughter standing there hitchhiking. And it was so cold that my father pulled over to give them a ride. This was the country. There was no public transportation. If you didn't have a car, you either got a ride from somebody or you walked. So a lot of people had to walk, but it was so cold. My father was a mechanic, and he had a shop in nearby Grove Hill. So he drove, picked them up, and they got in, and we drove together toward Grove Hill. And what I remember, what implanted itself in my mind, is that when this woman and her daughter got into our truck, we were suddenly very crowded, of course, and I smelled them, and they smelled like wood smoke. And I understood that they only had a fireplace for their heat. We had in our house, gas heat, natural gas heat. We had a big propane tank in our backyard, but they were poorer than we were, and they only had a fireplace for their heat. And we drove, and it was awkward. And at Grove Hill, about 7 miles away, they got out, and my father drove us to school, let us out, and he went about his day, and we went about our day. The next morning, they were there again, the mother and her daughter, and they were there the following morning, maybe 3 or 4 mornings in all. And then one day they were not there. Nothing became of that. It's something that happened to me in my childhood. It's an anecdote, a story you tell, but I always remembered it. And down there in Brazil, as I sat by the swimming pool in our 12-story condo in Belo Horizonte, trying to write my novel, I remembered that. And I knew that Crooked Letter was about 2 half-brothers. And I realized if I changed that girl and make him a boy, suddenly that could be Silas and his mother. And so I used that memory and began to write. Another example is I was a nerd when I was in high school. And now it's kind of cool to be a nerd. There are nerd YouTube channels, Nerdist does all kind of great things. And being a nerd is a cool thing, as I said. When I was a kid, it was dangerous to be a nerd. I got beat up a lot. People, were terrible to me. So, when I drew, I did it surreptitiously. When I wrote my stories, I did it surreptitiously. And I was not popular among the white boys or the black boys. I didn't really have any friends. But I did have one friend who was like me. His name was Wayne Coates, and he was a black boy. Wayne, like me, also enjoyed comic books and science fiction novels, and he liked to draw as I did. So we had a lot in common. But because he was black and I was white, we weren't allowed to be the kind of friends that both of us wanted to be to one another. And suddenly I realized that I was writing about Silas and Larry, but it was also based on me and Wayne. And there are so many more connections, so many more things from my own past that connect to Larry's past, that it's easier to say what doesn't connect than what does connect. Two things don't connect. One, Larry has an abusive, alcoholic, mean, unhappy father. I had a very good man for a father, a decent Christian, hardworking man. He was distant in the way fathers of his generation could be, but I knew that he loved me and he never abused me. I did get spankings. Everybody of my generation got spankings, with belts and switches, but frankly, my punishments always felt justified. I never felt I was wrongly punished. When I got a whipping, I deserved it. And the other way that I'm different from Larry is that I have a brother who I'm close to. I showed you him in the picture a moment ago, and I had cousins. So I didn't have Larry's excruciating loneliness. I was not popular at school, but when I went home, I had neighborhood friends, cousins, and my brother. So I wasn't lonely the way Larry is. But down there in Brazil, I just kept writing, and soon I had a draft of this novel, and it had surprised me at how autobiographical it became, because I did not expect that. Now, I could probably just keep rambling and talking. A Southerner in the United States, we're famous for long answers, but I'll see if there are any questions coming through.
Well, it's very interesting that you told us that a lot of Larry and a lot of the situations are biographical, but let's perhaps have a closer look at the characters in the book now. And our students are interested in the aspects that are connecting Larry and Silas. You've already talked a bit about them. Why does their first friendship not work out? And at the end of the novel, do you think there is a chance for real reconciliation between them?
I think that the first friendship does not work out because of the events of the novel. I think that also between both boys is a kind of envy, and there's also a schism that Carl Ott puts there by making them fight. They really have no chance of being friends the way even I was friends with Wayne, because there's too much in the way. There's Silas, his mother's fear that he might get, hurt because he's involved with the white girl. There's Carl Ott's anger that won't let them be friends, Silas and Larry. There's Silas's jealousy of Larry. Silas is jealous that Larry has this father. Silas hears Carl Ott say to Larry about cutting the grass which Silas actually cut. Silas hears Carl Ott say to Larry, "Good job, boy," about cutting the grass. And that stings Silas, because first he did the work, but also he should get the compliment. He should have his own father to say those kinds of things to him, and he doesn't. So it makes him jealous. And so I think that jealousy gets in the way, and it makes Silas even a bit mean to Larry. Larry himself is just honestly so pathetic, but he makes a terrible friend because he's so clingy and needy and sad. So I think there's lots of reasons why their first friendship doesn't work out. It's based in things that it's based in bad soil, so to speak. There's no way it can grow. But to the other part of that question,
the other part was about the end. Let's stick with Larry a little bit, because a question came up here in the chat. Would you consider him a freak in the sense that he's a nerd and generally seen as a weirdo because of his unusual behavior?
Freak is a hard word. I would consider him unusual for his time. Yes, he is a nerd when it's dangerous to be a nerd, but he also, friendless as he is, tries too hard to become friends, and even tries to befriend people in the wrong ways, trying to impress the two boys as they're swinging together by even sort of co-opting their prejudices to try to make them like him. I think that all these things make Larry freakish, perhaps. I wouldn't say he's a freak, but I say he has freakish tendencies. And again, these were my tendencies. I used to bring, whenever, I loved and love snakes. I love to catch them. And whenever I would catch one at school, and I would show people, and people were afraid of them. And that gave me power over them, because I was not afraid of the snake. And Larry has the same feature, the same characteristic, but he also is the boy who catches snakes. And that's strange. Most boys didn't do that. And like me, Larry had a monster mask that he brought to school one day. I remember bringing that mask to school on Halloween because I wanted people to like me at school. And because it was unusual to have a big, heavy monster mask, I was noticed, and everybody wanted to try it on. And I remember after they tried it on, I would put it on and it smelled like the girl's breath, like her hair, and it was very sensuous. Larry tries this too. But he's trying so hard. I think we all know, that the harder you try, the less appealing you are. So no, I don't think that he was a freak, but I think that because he tried so hard, he was noticed in hard ways.
Well, maybe then let's come back to the relationship between Larry and Silas towards the end of the novel. There is a chance that there is reconciliation, but do you see that this chance will work out?
Yes, I very much do. I think that the novel has a really hopeful ending because Silas has reached out and Larry is responding. It's a muted ending. It's not everyone dancing and singing, but Silas has reached out and Larry has responded. So I do feel is true hope for them to be what the other needs, because they need each other. They are each other's half brother. They're all the family that each has left, except Larry's mother, but she's barely available with her Alzheimer's. So because the novel ends with Larry calling Silas to say, you need to bring the carburetor kit, yeah, I think that there's a great chance of a reconciliation.
Do you think people would think differently of Larry if Silas had confessed earlier?
Yes, I do. I think that Silas's not confessing is a big act of cowardice on his part. As a boy, I understand his not confessing. It would have been dangerous to him. I understand his fleeing Mississippi, or fleeing the South and going to the north part of the state. I understand that. But when he returns and sees what's happened, that's when I think Silas really does a terrible thing to Larry. And I have trouble forgiving that, that he doesn't, because of his own shame, he doesn't reach out to Larry and say, okay, I'm sorry. And then I see what's happened and I've got some information that could help, that might have helped you then. But I think right now he's ashamed of himself and he's embarrassed. And those are two hard emotions to deal with. I think they're easily swept aside and put away. And that's what he does, to Larry's detriment, and to Silas's own detriment. I think Angie is a great voice in Silas's ear, because she tells him what he should do. You know, you need to take care of this.
So do you think that Larry really means something to Silas? Because, I mean, shame and embarrassment can be overcome, but he finds it very hard. He struggles right to the end.
I think Larry will come to mean family to Silas. I don't, at the end of the novel, I think Silas is figuring out what Larry is to him. And I think that he really does want to try to reconcile all the things that he does, you know, making Larry's house ready, even something as almost silly as getting cable is a real kindness, because it brings the world to Larry where it wasn't to Larry before. Larry had the local channels. Now he has all kinds of channels, the satellite beaming the world, the universe into him. And the fact that Silas kept feeding the chickens, you know, Silas, I think, by stepping into Larry's shoes for a while, sees and understands Larry's life in a way that no one else has, and sees not just the sadness and the loneliness of Larry's life, but the kindness that Larry fomented, you know, that just such a kind person that he even wanted to help chickens have a better life with that moving cage. That lets the chickens have every day, you know, fresh grass to eat, and fresh bugs, new bugs to eat. And it gives them grit from the ground that helps them digest what they eat. So it's such a kindness. And Silas, by sitting in Larry's easy chair, by walking around Larry's house, opening his refrigerator and seeing what's in there, seeing those chickens, he understands that this is a human capable of great kindness. And my own actions have inadvertently stifled that kindness, and stifled this human from being who he could have possibly been. So I do think that Silas, you know, certainly shame and embarrassment are not things to build a relationship on, but interest and kindness certainly are a thing to build a relationship on. Excuse me. So it's complicated, as fiction needs to be, because life is complicated and fiction is based on life. You know, art is imitating life. So it won't be an easy reconciliation with them. And I think that at some point they will have to have hard words. But, you know, hard words, I think, can lead to softer words. And I think that there is, I mean. And even as the person who wrote the book, yes, I can say definitively that they are going to get together and be friends later. You know, I've in answering this question, I have described the books, the first ending that I wrote. And the first ending was too much. In that ending, I had Larry sitting on his sofa, in his chair one Sunday morning, watching a TV sermon, TV church, and hear someone pull up, and it's Silas and Angie, and they convinced Larry to go to Angie's church. She's bringing Silas to church, and now they're inviting Larry, and Larry doesn't want to go, but they talk him into it. He puts on his father's old suit, his only suit, and he rides to church. And when he gets there, you know, it's Angie's church. There are no white people. It's only black people in this church. And the churchyard is filled with people before they move into the building for the service. And Larry even sees Jackie, who he made fun of and called a terrible name. And he goes up to her and apologizes, and she forgives him. And then they go into the church, and Larry sits in one of the long pews, Angie, Silas, and Larry, and they begin to sing. And, you know, and famously, the music in African-American churches is beautiful. And as they sing and the music swells, Larry starts to cry. Larry is feeling something he's never felt. He's feeling a kind of welcome, and he's feeling the joy you feel in a crowd when everyone has the same thing, like you feel at a rock concert or sometimes church, and everybody stands up, but Larry's legs have no strength. He can't stand up. He's just so moved and so weakened by his own emotion that he keeps sitting there. And Silas, when he sees that Larry can't stand up, sits down beside him and puts his arm around him. And, you know, in this ending, Larry's crying and Silas is crying. And as I was writing it, typing it, I was crying. And, it was too much.
Yeah, sounds a little sentimental.
It was far too sentimental. Yeah, and you know, sentimental is easy, unearned emotion, and I had lots of easy, unearned emotion. When my wife read this ending, she said, "Oh my God, throw this away, tear it up, burn it. You can't do this." But my mother had always asked me to write a happy ending, and I wrote that for her. And so, you know, but it's not the ending in the book, of course. You know, in the book, it's a much more muted ending. It's not sentimental. But in my mind, that still kind of happens. At some point, they will take Larry to church and he'll be accepted by this community and he won't feel freakish because he's accepted, you know. And also, the internet is right around the corner for Larry. And I think that the internet's going to notice him, this person who for 20 or 25 years was wronged and realized he's been exonerated. And I think that some person is going to read about him on the internet from maybe Tennessee. Dyersburg, Tennessee is where she lives. And she's going to ride and see Larry. And one day, one Saturday afternoon, someone's going to knock at his door. He's going to open it. And she's going to say, "Hey, Larry," you know, and they might have a really good relationship. Why not?
And that answers another question from the chat, actually. Will Larry ever find love? Or will it be possible for him to find love? Let's go on to other characters now. And you started about the women. What is always intriguing for readers is what made you decide that Cindy's fate would not be confirmed? Well, that's a loose end, sort of.
Yes, it is a loose end, and that was left loose on purpose. That was intentional, because I want this novel to be as lifelike as it can be. I wanted to make it believable and realistic. And sadly, in real life, there are things we don't know. There are mysteries that are never solved, always left open, and we just don't know. And certainly I know what happened to Cindy. And the novel suggests that her stepfather, Cecil, probably in a drunken rage, killed her when she came home from her date with a black boy. That's probably what happened, or at least the novel suggests that. But nobody knows for sure. As far as anybody knows, she may have just hitchhiked away and kept going. No public transportation, but somebody would have given her a ride, because you gave rides in situations like that. If somebody's so far out in the country, typically gave them rides. Sorry,
we have two possibilities.
Yeah. My phone keeps beeping at me because it's my son's little group chat. So sorry if you hear binging. Sorry about that. It's nothing that I have to worry about, but it's my. Oh, good.
Okay. Right. Let's.
But sorry, one more thing, Inga. Just that in my mind, Cindy is alive and well. That's the truth. I see her as having hitchhiked away from this part of Mississippi, and I see her as having gone to, honestly, Brazil. That's where she lives now, and she met a woman and is in love with her, and lives happily in Belo Horizonte and another town called Ouro Preto. They have two houses where they live, and they do shift time between the two houses. And again, as the writer of the book, I can say that, right?
Yes, of course. Invent more stories. There's been a question about whether there's going to be a sequel. Would you consider writing a part 2 of the novel?
Well, I have thought about it.
Really?
Yeah. And it would not be the sequel people expect, I think. I think that if it were, the main character, the protagonist, would be Rory French, who is Silas's boss, who's the chief investigator for major crimes of his county for the sheriff's department. And I think that his daughter is missing, or his son is missing, or something. And Silas gets involved. I don't know how Larry would be involved. So right now, I don't have any plans to do a sequel. I'm trying to finish another long story right now. And no, I think if there were a sequel, it would not be what people expected.
Okay, let's get back to the characters. And we were starting with the women. Let's go on to Alice. Would you say Alice is a good mother? Is the last question I got here.
Would I say Alice is a good mother? Yes. Yes, I would. I would say Alice is put in a hard situation to have to flee Chicago and to not know where she's going, to be, to put herself in, in the hands of a stranger, of a kind stranger, and get the ride for the man in his pickup truck. Alice, how could you consider her anything but a good mother who's trying her best to do the best for her son? I do think that Alice is human. And my favorite moment, I think one of my favorite moments in the novel Crooked Letter, is when Alice and Silas first arrive where they're going. I think it's in Folsom, and they go to a diner to get something to eat. And Silas is he's jumped out of the man's car and lost their stuff. He's been kind of a baby, and he's not being the tough kid she needs him to be right now. She worries that she's been too easy on him. That's her fear. But in this diner, she's so fed up with him that she displays a real human moment and says, would you just let me eat my breakfast alone? Let me sit by myself for a minute. Right now, I don't want to be with you. Yeah, I see her as a very good mother, but also as a very real human who has feelings and who even can get tired and angry with her own son for his behavior. But I see her also as being brave and hardworking and even forceful in her way. I mean, when they get to Folsom, she knows where that cabin is because she used to be employed by Carl and Ina Ott. She knows it's there. It's a place they can go. But also, she knows that Carl's there, and she knows that he will pick them up. And he does. And she knows that he owes her. So they get a car pretty quickly. And of course, they get the car from Carl Ott. And then they get a better house. And, it's implied in the novel, or I hope it is, that Carl begins to help her get on her feet. There's no relationship there anymore, but she feels she's owed, and she makes that happen. And she does, there's not a lot of details about her life. She's there, as a tertiary character. Silas and Larry are the main characters. She is, well, I would say a secondary character, not a tertiary character. But everything about her, in my mind, is admirable. All that we know and see about her is admirable.
Would you say the same thing about Larry's mother?
Perhaps not. I would say Larry's mother had a lot more, but what she does not have is a husband who loves her. She does not have a happy marriage. And I think an unhappy marriage will create many other symptoms. So I think that she's trying to give Larry the best life she can, but she and Larry both know that Carl doesn't like either one of them. Maybe on some level, to some degree, he loves them because Larry is in fact his son, but I don't think he likes them. And that's hard and possible for a parent to love but not like a child, and even to perhaps even, not love and then not like, eventually become to hate a spouse. And I think that he does hate. Well, hate may be a strong word. I think he resents both his family members. He resents Ina because they had to get married because she was pregnant. And he resents Larry because he's nothing like Carl. He has all the attributes of Ina's side of the family that Carl doesn't like. I think that we see some colors that Ina shows when she doesn't give Alice and Silas a ride. She instead gives them coats. They don't have coats. She gives them coats. That is not, I mean, it's, I guess, I don't see that as kindness. Certainly they needed the coats, but the way they were given and the fact that they were left in the cold is not a real admirable thing that Ina Ott does. But Ina Ott is also trying to protect her family. She understands that this is a threat to her family, to her and to Larry. So she's put in a bad place. You know, life can do that. Life can throw up things and they land in awkward positions. And as I've said before, novels need to create real life situations. I think so anyway. And this is a complicated situation. So nobody's all good and nobody's all bad. Ina has good attributes and so does Alice, and they both have bad attributes. Certainly Silas and Larry have attributes that one would consider at least questionable. We've talked a bit about that with Silas, but because this is, I hope, a literary, realistic crime novel, that every character is deep to an extent and that no character is so simple as to be stereotyped.
What about characters like Wallace and Cecil then? I mean, we'd all agree that they are the bad guys in the novel, wouldn't we?
Yes. Yes.
You consider Wallace, well, some student wrote, is he one-dimensional, or do you see a multi-dimensional character here as well that goes down deep?
I see a multi-dimensional character in Wallace. I find Wallace in parts very, very sad, and also he makes me laugh. I find him funny at times. To me, he's almost a Joker character. He's almost ridiculous, but everything about him can be explained, I think, by his upbringing, by his childhood. He did not grow up with a father. He grew up with a mother who drank a lot and dragged him from, you know, boyfriend to boyfriend. He would wake up on different sofas often, and his mother would then drag him to church. So he's being shown, quote, sinful behavior, and then he's being dragged to church to think about it. Now, he's just a little boy at that point, and he doesn't know what to do, what to think. He doesn't have a good figure to influence him, not just a father figure, but a mother figure. He's looking for someone to admire. And then one day he sees this guy, Scary Larry, who's kind of famous, walk into church. And Wallace notices him and knows who he is and becomes fascinated by him. And Wallace is lonely and sad and becomes, over his life, because of things that he sees and hears, a bit perverted, sure. And Wallace just turns his fascination on Larry, but not on the parts of Larry that need to be seen, the parts of Larry that are hidden, the kindness that Larry displays to the chickens. What he sees is the fact that Larry might be famous for having killed somebody. And to me, another aspect of Wallace's character is an awful tendency in my country to sort of admire serial killers. Serial killers have fans. You know, they write to them in prison. So, you know, Wallace becomes kind of a fan of Larry, of Scary Larry, his idea of Scary Larry, what Scary Larry is, and not the person Larry really is himself. So he becomes enamored with a perverted view of Larry. And that's where, and his focus aims at and shifts it. And whereas he might have had his good, his stronger, his better human instincts strengthened with a better role model, he doesn't have that. And because of who this sad little lonely boy was, seeking love, he sought it in the wrong place. And this is how, you know, how he perverted it himself. So he's a monster, yeah. But as the book says, all monsters are misunderstood. Monsters have a backstory too. every monster, they weren't just made monsters. I mean, excuse me, they were made monsters. They weren't a monster to begin with. Children are taught racism. Children are taught to be what they become as adults. And, this is a long way of saying Wallace had real bad teachers and looked in the wrong places.
Is that a justification why he doesn't have to face any real consequences for his crimes?
I think he's killed in the novel. Those are the outright.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what Wallace is killed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I think he would have been arrested and he would have been found guilty and tried,
Mm-hmm.
but he was killed, obviously,
mm-hmm.
by the sheriff's department. So I'm not sure I understand that question.
Mm-hmm. Well, the original question was both about Cecil and Wallace. Is there a reason that both Cecil and Wallace don't have to face any real consequences for their crimes? But I mean, death, of course, being shot is a serious consequence, a real consequence. And Cecil died before found out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Cecil, we're not 100% sure that he killed her,
exactly.
But the novel does in fact suggest it. But let's also remember how Cecil dies. Do you remember? I gave him stomach cancer. I gave him one of the worst kinds of cancers. Okay. I punished him. That was my choice as the writer. Mm-hmm. So not Silas, Cecil. Cecil dies of a horrible disease. And I chose that because I did punish him. So he's punished, but not by the justice system within the novel. Within the
I can't hear you. Maybe I couldn't hear the rest of it because somehow my internet connection is a bit shaky today. I don't know why that is.
Can you hear now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's on and off. Let's talk about some of the themes in the novel. There was one question about mental health. To what extent is mental health a central aspect of the novel? If you consider the condition of Larry and Ina Ott and also Wallace Stringfellow.
I did not consider mental health at all. Mental health, the idea of it is a lot more prevalent, in 2023 than it was when I was writing this novel in 2007 and 8 and 9. I wasn't thinking about what kind of, what condition anyone might have had. Just that Wallace, because of his upbringing, had been turned into a monster. And the rest of the people were just trying to get along the best way that they can. Certainly, I think Larry is probably depressed. I think Wallace might be, is probably a psychopath. They have their conditions, but I wasn't thinking about them in terms of their mental health. I was thinking about them in terms of, the characters and what they were doing. Again, I probably would now. My daughter is graduating college, and she's into neuroscience, and she is her focus is going to be how women are not diagnosed nearly as often with right out of my head. Why don't we take Adderall? What is Adderall for? It's for oh gosh, I'm sorry. It's already been a long day and it's only 9:53 here. This is anyway. My daughter is certainly getting me more interested in the idea of mental health and thinking about it. And her idea is that girls are treated less often than boys are for this condition, the name of which has gone out of my head. I'm sorry about that.
I think it might be ADHD.
Thank you. That's ADHD. Thank you. ADHD is exactly what it is. And that's interesting to me. But no, I didn't think of that. That wasn't part of my thought process.
Okay. Is masculinity a topic in the book, would you say?
Very much so. And it's symbolized in the rifle that Larry has and loses, and by the end of the novel gets back. I mean, a rifle and the cartridges they shoot are phallic symbols. People, say that men have guns because, they have short penises, or whatever they say. I think guns are crazy and prevalent in my country. And certainly I think they are a symbol, if you will, of masculinity. And athletics as well. Athletics are a symbol of masculinity, certainly to Carl. Larry is unathletic and Silas is athletic. So I think that, Larry is kind of a sissy in Carl's eye and is not masculine to Carl's eye. And masculinity to Carl Ott is very important. He lives in a man's world. He works on cars and he holds court. Men come to his shop and listen to him tell stories. And that's a very masculine environment. There were no female mechanics when I was growing up, and there are fewer now because it was and is a very male-dominated profession. So I think very much masculinity is laced throughout the novel.
Guns, and especially that rifle, play a really important role in the book. What do you personally think about gun control? Do you think there should be stricter laws?
Yes, I do. I think there should be very strict laws. I was talking to a man from Canada once, and he told me he had 14 guns. And I said, whoa, that's ridiculous. I said, do you have an AK-47? Do you have machine guns? I was being kind of a jerk. He said, no, very earnestly. He said, no, we have very different laws in my country. And he began to describe, you can't have these ridiculous high magazine capacity firearms. And I understood that he was proud of the laws, of the gun laws. And I thought, that's interesting. We have so many laws about our cars here, seatbelt laws and all kind of laws. Nobody minds those laws. And cars, as you know, trucks have become weapons now. People are driving them into crowds. So, and they're regulated. Why can't guns be regulated the same way? No, I very much believe in gun control. I have a gun. I have a gun that my father gave me. It's my inheritance. I will give it to one of my sons, but it's only a shotgun. It's not a rifle. And it's also an antique and it's beautiful. I don't shoot it anymore. It's hidden in a closet. I don't have any shells for it because I don't want to kill anything. In that way, I see that, a firearm can be a piece of art. It can be, as my colleague here, Barry Hanna, said once, a hunk of history hanging on the wall. But, but when people take out plugs and make the guns even more deadly, I don't think we need that. Our former president, Jimmy Carter, of whom I'm a great admirer, has said, you only need if you're a hunter, you need two guns, a rifle and a shotgun. And the rifle doesn't need to be anything that fires more than 5 or 6 times. You don't need any high capacity magazines. So I'm ashamed of my country in its gun fervor. But I do have in my own family people who collect guns, people who have those very guns that I hate and disdain. People in my own family have them. So it's a huge problem over here.
Did your father teach you how to shoot a gun?
Yes, he did. And again, that goes back to the masculinity. That's one thing. I was raised in such a way where I took out the garbage and my sister did the dishes. She vacuumed and I cut the grass. We were given, masculine versus feminine jobs based on our gender. And one of the things that boys did where I grew up in Alabama, in this, in that landscape, is hunt. If you didn't hunt, you were a freak. And I say that word, and I didn't like to hunt. So I felt like a freak. So I pretended to want to hunt so I would fit in. And much of my life was about pretending to fit in so that I would belong. So I got for my 15th birthday a Marlin lever action 30-30 rifle, which I, after that sold a bit longer. And I killed deer. I went into the woods and I shot deer. I had my face bloodied. When you kill a deer, your first deer, if they take blood from the deer and put it on your face, I had that happen. So yeah, I have shot many guns and I've killed every kind of animal that exists in Alabama, with the exception of a coyote, probably. I don't hunt anymore, as I say. But guns are a big part of the culture, and they're a masculine part of the culture for the most part. And I would have felt like a freak if I hadn't been indoctrinated into, the gun culture.
Okay, let's move on to the topic of racism. Do you think that your novel can help address important central aspects of racism and how to deal with it?
I sure hope so. I sure hope so. What's interesting is a few months ago, I got a note from a young woman, a high school student, a young woman here in Mississippi, down in Jackson, Mississippi, about 2.5 hours south of here. And she wrote me an email. It was very terse, and it said, "Dear Mr. Franklin, because I teach here at the University of Mississippi, anyone in the world can find my email and can write me a letter." So she wrote me one and said, "Dear Mr. Franklin, we were made to read your novel in my class, and I would like to say disrespectfully, fuck you." And she gave me her name. And I thought, wow, it surprised me. So I waited a day or two and I wrote her back and I said, "Dear blank, I'm sorry if my book offended you or hurt you, but what is in the book that is so harmful that would make you say this, fuck you, to a complete stranger?" She wrote me back and said, "I just didn't feel as a young Black woman I should be made to read to read the N-word from an old white man. As a young Black woman, why should I have to read the N-word from an old white man?" Mm-hmm. And I wrote her a 3-page letter, and I said, "You should not." And I told her how the novel came to be written. I didn't tell y'all this, but when I first began to work on Crooked Letter, it was set in Alabama, and it was not called Crooked Letter, and it was just about two brothers, and they were both white, because my brother is white and I'm white, and he's a mechanic like I am, like our father was, but he's very different from me. I'm very liberal on the left leaning. He's very conservative on the right. He voted for Donald Trump both times, right? But he and I are very close still. And I was interested in how somebody can grow up together. One person can change, but still they're very close. That history can link people. And I was trying to work on this novel, and I couldn't get it to work. And I told my friend, who is an African-American writer, David Wright Falladay, about this. And he said, "Why don't you," because I said to David, my novel's about two guys. One's a mechanic who has no customers. That's all I know about him. And the other is a small town police officer. That's all I know about him. But they're brothers, I think. And my friend David Wright Falladay, who's an African-American writer, said, "Make the cop a Black guy. That'll make the book more interesting." I thought, well, that's an interesting suggestion. And I said, "But David, I don't feel like I have the right to write from the point of view of someone from another race." He said, "Of course you do. You have to do it right." He said, "When it's offensive to people like me, to Black people, when white people do it, is when they don't do it well, when they make us Black people seem simple or just, or like a stereotype." So he said, "And when you get the book finished, I'll read it for you, and I'll make sure that everything about race and race relations is correct." And I said, "Okay." So it was hard to write Silas as a Black man, but I tried it. It took a long time. It took years. But when I finally had the novel in a draft form, I'd finished the first draft of it. I sent it to David, who called me, and we talked about every race-related term and every race-related concept. The book has the N word in it. I know that. And every time it's in there, he and I talked about it. He said, it works here. It's appropriate here. She would say it. She would not say it. She would think black, he told me once. They wouldn't say that word here. So this is my dear friend who loves me and trusts me and knows my heart. And so I told all this to this young woman, and I said, this is why I wrote the book, because my friend, I felt, gave me permission. And, you know, and I just told her this, and I said, you know, again, I'm so sorry if the book offended you. And I gave her the names of several books I had recently read by African-American writers, in case you wanted to check any of those out. And then she wrote me back again and said, thank you for that long, thoughtful response. I'm sorry for my first rude email, and I appreciate the fact that your friend gave you permission. So it ended and became a really good teaching moment. It ended well, for me, and I think, you know, hopefully for her too. But I do hope that the novel will make people think differently about somebody. Maybe that, like maybe that, that Silas isn't who you thought he was, or Larry isn't who you thought he was. And I do want at the end of it, people to understand that these two men need each other. Despite their differences, they need each other, and they're each other's family. They're one another's family. That's what, I want a reader to take away. And also to take away that someone like Larry might not be the monster you think, that monsters are, in fact, often, if not always, misunderstood.
Okay, thank you. I know you've already talked about the title and how what the crooked letter stands for, but what does the title really stand for? Does it have something to do with snakes? Is an idea that came up in the chat.
Absolutely, it does. When I thought of that as a title, I remember the exact moment. I was standing in my office, and I work in our backyard in a little guest house. I was standing in there looking at my bookshelf, and I saw a book called One Mississippi from a writer named Mark Childress, who's a friend of mine. It's a really good novel. And I thought, one Mississippi, people say one Mississippi, two Mississippi. That's how we count seconds. If we played hide and seek as children, hide and seek, you would count one Mississippi, two Mississippi, to make sure you didn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, count too fast. And I thought, wow, Mississippi is so interesting. It has a lot of these mnemonic devices connected to it, a lot of things connected to the name Mississippi. And then I remembered crooked letter, and thought how my dad would say, my crooked letter, I, crooked letter, I, humpback, I. And he would sing it. There was a little song about it. And there's a couple of other songs that contain that language, crooked letter. And I thought, what a great title that would be for a book. Right away, it seems like a crime novel because of the word crooked, like a crook, a bad guy. Something crooked, is often not, it's not straight, so it's wrong. And I thought, ooh, also what a cool word, crooked, where in most words with that spelling O-O-D, like looked, cooked, booked, all that, all those words are one syllable, but crooked demands 2 syllables, not crooked, but crooked letter. And the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. And certainly crooked letters are S's, and and Silas's name begins with an S and ends with an S, if you think about that. Mm-hmm. And I gave Wallace Stringfellow my love of snakes. So Wallace catches snakes and puts even a snake in a woman's mailbox. So the South is filled with snakes, and we have venomous snakes in the South, rattlesnakes and cottonmouths, water moccasins, coral snakes, copperheads, beautiful animals. But some of them are quite deadly. Some of them will kill you if they bite you and you don't get medical treatment quickly. So it's something we all live with. You always see them crawling across the road as you're driving. But yeah, absolutely. It's crooked letters are snakes. But further than that, crooked letter is a mnemonic device, that way of spelling mnemonic, mnemonic, is a teaching device about how you spell, you teach kids how to spell curricular letters. So it's a teaching device. And the novel is also about how we educate our children into and hopefully out of racism. So the more I thought about the title, the more I liked it and the more apropos it became for this novel, especially once I moved it into Mississippi. It couldn't be called that and take place in Alabama. That would be wrong, and everybody would know.
Did you have to change a lot when you moved it into Mississippi from Alabama?
Not one thing. The states are so similar. They're beside each other in the country. They're contiguous, and they are sister states. You know, the one difference is in the north, Mississippi has hills, Alabama has mountains, and in the south, Alabama's got a bit more and kind of classier Gulf Coast beaches. The beaches in Alabama, I think, are more beautiful than the beaches in Mississippi. But otherwise, they're fairly identical states, sister states, I call them. So the attitudes of people are the same. Mississippi has a lot more writers than Alabama does. You know, Mississippi is a state really, really rich in writers. You think Richard Wright, Eudora Welty, of course, the Nobel-winning William Faulkner lived in my town right here in Oxford. He lived less than a mile from where I sit. This is William Faulkner's house.
Coming back to your novel, what is your favorite moment in this novel?
My favorite moment. This is going to be kind of silly and maybe even a little sad, but I think it's so funny when Wallace is telling what happened to all of his dogs, how they all got killed by railroads, you know, a train and a snake. Those are all my dogs, and those are how my dogs were killed. That's just kind of a funny and sad moment to me. I like the ending. I like the ending. Other parts, you know what? I really like the moment when Larry and Silas meet in Larry's truck. That's typically the part I read when I read from the book. And when I did a couple of visits to Germany, you know, back in, gosh, 2018 and 19, maybe before COVID, I would read from the book, and I always read the part where, you know, where Carlotte's driving Larry and they pick up Alice and Silas. I like that part. Oh, and here's my favorite part of the book. Now that you asked me, I thought about it for a moment. It actually is the end of the section when they first meet. It ends with Larry giving Silas the rifle, and Silas runs toward the cabin, and Larry leaves him his gloves, and Larry feels full of air. He feels really good about everything. Larry feels good. I love that moment when Larry feels full of air.
Now, again, I didn't hear most of it, but
oh, I'm sorry.
But everybody else did, so that's okay.
Oh, it was a beautiful, wonderful answer.
I'm sure it was. You know, what I really liked about, well, what I find interesting about the book is the use of the chickens. The chickens moved around the field and they come up so often. Is there a symbolic meaning in the chickens?
Only, I think, as
now
I said earlier,
I suppose.
Yeah, they are there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The chickens are there just to show Larry exhibiting kindness. You know, they're also there as, you know, the sad history of his mother. They're what he has left of his mother. You know, he remembers them. She doesn't even remember her chickens. She's with Alzheimer's, losing everything, one memory at a time. She's going away from Larry. So the chickens are emblematic of his mother, but also—
I'm so sorry, but I can't hear you.
I think it's your internet connection, Inge, because I can hear Tom perfectly fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well,
okay.
I'll keep going then, if that's okay. I'll just keep going.
I'm due with the next question, perhaps.
Sure, I can finish the chicken question if you would like. It's whatever you want.
Sophia.
Yeah, how about we go on with the next question? There's one in the chat, actually. Tom, do you regret anything you've written in your book? And how do you think about it compared to your other work?
Well, to be honest, I regret that I think I could probably have taken the N-word out a few more times. I wish it were in there less than it is the truth now. Yeah. And that, and there may be one other moment. It might be that I might have let Larry reflect a little bit on the fact that when Cecil is strangling him, that he might have recently strangled Cindy as well, and that Cecil's hot hands might be hot from Cindy's throat. I think Larry might have thought that, and that would have been it's a moment that, you know, I just think Larry didn't think about it enough. So yeah, those two things. The writer Richard Ford told me once, never let them rush you. Never regret anything in your novels. And he says he doesn't, but with every novel, every book I've published, I've had regrets because at the end, it always feels rushed. They always need it faster than I'm able to give it to them. And, you know, typically I wish I could have changed, often small things. And this is even a silly thing, but in maybe the first or second page of Crooked Letter, I mentioned barbed wire, which is wire with sharp points, which is how, you know, cows and livestock are kept in a pen, and it helps keep predators away as well. And I spelled it the way it sounds. I spelled it, instead of B-A-R-B-E-D, barbed wire, I spelled it bob wire, B-O-B wire, because people say bob wire, you know, where I grew up. I got so many angry emails about that. It's spelled B-A-R-B-E-D. One person quit reading the book. He was so angry about how I spelled barbed wire. And this is silly, but people will stop reading for silly reasons. And some people thought that I made a mistake and they wanted to point out my mistake. Readers love to point out your mistakes. Many times when I would read in this country, someone would raise their hand and say, I found something you got wrong. Great. I'll say, thanks. What is it? So, you know, and also with all you wonderful German readers, y'all have found mistakes in the book that no one else has found. I've gotten emails from people in Germany, from teachers, from students who say, you said this on page 14, but on page 142, it seems different. And here's the thing, this book, you know, when I wrote it, I had people who read it for me. My wife read it, my agent read it, my editor read it, my publisher read it, my marketing executive read it, my film editor read it. All these people read it, copy editor. A lot of people read it, and they all missed everything. And there are probably 7 or 8 little moments that German students and teachers have found. All those American editors and readers missed it, and y'all found it. You're reading it way, way, way more carefully than anyone on this side of the pond.
Well, I'm not so sure that we should be proud of that, you know, meticulous way of reading.
Oh, no. Here's the thing: the German emails were not proud; they were curious. Why is this different? And I had to say, in every case, I made a mistake. But the United States audiences, they're the ones, oh, you got it wrong. You know, like that. That really is kind of annoying. Never from Germany, always from here, the US.
Would you like a novel to be turned into a film?
Very much.
And
in fact, it has been optioned for film. A film option of a book is when a film producer wants to possibly make a book into a movie. They have to option it, which is the first step. That simply means it's taken off the market. No one else can do that book while they've got it optioned. They pay X number of dollars, you know, $5,000 or something, and they've got the book for a year. And if nothing happens in that year, the option lapses. They can renew it and keep trying, or just give up. With Crooked Letter, it has been optioned by the same production company for the last 12 years. Ooh. So for 12 years, they have optioned it, and they've tried to make it for 12 years. It has gone from being a feature film, it was first written as a 2-hour movie, to now it's written as a streaming series for Amazon Prime or HBO Max or Netflix or some service like that. And they've got 6 episodes with the possibility of more episodes. And what's interesting is they've got a Black director interested and a Black writer. And this writer has written in another character. This writer has written in a sister for Silas. That to me seems like a very smart move. You know, whatever, if they ever do film it, TV or film, whatever, it won't be my book. It'll be what they make of it. When you sell it, you know, once they begin filming, they have to then buy the book. That's the next step. They option it until they begin principal photography. Then they have to buy the book. And when they buy it, it's theirs. It could be whatever they want it to be. And it seems to me that another strong female character would help the story of Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter. So I don't mind that this other person is written in. I'm just curious as to how she will be as a character in the story of Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter, if they ever make it. It's been 12. I've been waiting for 12 years. Yeah. And this company has made 5 other films in those 12 years. And they assure me they're going to make it. And I've become friends with these people and I believe them. They're great people. It just hasn't happened yet. I want to be alive when it happens. That's my goal.
Who would you cast for you know?
You know what's funny is when the novel, when I was writing it, I'm a very cinematic thinker and I love movies and TV shows. So I almost always cast my books as I'm writing them. But back when I was writing it in 2007, that's a long time ago, you know. I had Denzel Washington and Billy Bob Thornton as Silas and Larry, respectively. But now, you know, I need Omar Epps and Casey Affleck. I need younger actors now. So yeah, I do think about that.
Would you prefer it to be a movie for the cinema or a series?
I would prefer a series because it seems to me that's the perfect way to tell a story. You know, a movie, it's so condensed. It has so little time. And one of these streaming series has, you know, 6 or 8 or as many parts as they want to give it. You know, typically HBO gives it 10 episodes. It's a show I love called Dairy Girls on Netflix. I think they're just 6 or 8 episodes. So, you know, you could have, if you did Crooked Letter as one, the whole second episode could be backstory. It could all be in the 1970s. It could begin with Larry being shot and Silas finding him and all that, and then go to their backstory. Or the backstory could be flashed back throughout the series. But I think as a medium, that's a really good way to tell a story because you have as much time as you need. You know, with shows on the networks, they're all they're half an hour long or they're an hour long, right? That means they're either 22 minutes with 8 minutes for commercials or 44 minutes with 16 minutes for commercials, right? That's a very strict format. But I've been watching a new show on HBO called The Last of Us. It's based on a video game. I don't play video games, but the show is very good. The first episode was an hour and 21 minutes long or something. It was almost the length of a short film. The second episode was about 58 minutes long. And the third was an hour and 20 minutes again. So it's as long as it needs to be, and the writer is able to do what they want to do versus having to fit it into a 22-minute slot or a 44-minute slot. So those, you know, to me were the drawbacks to writing for television. Now writing for television is even more free than writing for film because, you know, a film, they don't want it to be more than an hour and 20 minutes, you know, whatever. An hour and 20 minutes, you know, 2 hours long, 120 minutes, 2 hours long. That's what a film should be, or 90 minutes, right? If it's 2.5 hours long, they start to give you trouble. They don't want it to be long. Sometimes they mostly want it to be very formulaic and 2 hours. So I think I would love the streaming service. And as it's written, I'm told, I have not seen it, but I've told as it's written, they have left it open for a possible second season if that came to be.
Okay. But the writer in this case, that wouldn't be you, that would be a screenplay writer.
That's right.
Okay.
And they've already had
on
at
the
least,
novel by. Mhm.
yeah, it would be, yeah, but based on my novel, but it'd be, screenplay by so and so. They've already had 3 writers so far.
Mhm.
They had one called Nathan Parker, whose father is Alan Parker, who's a famous filmmaker. He made Mississippi Burning, for instance, and he made a movie about dancers. I can't think of the name. But so it's been written as a screenplay and then rewritten as a screenplay and now rewritten as a teleplay with episodes.
Mhm. Okay, I just got a notice from Sophia. The audience would like to go back to the chickens. Now I missed out a little bit on this. Maybe that is that still necessary?
Yeah.
Have you said everything about the chickens?
I love the chickens. My wife is does magazine writing, and we went once to a farm in Illinois, an organic farm, and she wrote an article about it. And they had these kind of chicken cages, and the farmer was so kind. He said, "I just feel bad for chickens. If they're in the same chicken pen and the wire doesn't move, they're on hard, flat dirt, and then you have to feed them. Just throw stuff in there." He liked the idea that the chickens could eat fresh bugs and fresh grass.
Mm-hmm.
I just loved that idea, and it occurred to me that Larry's mother had chickens, and that the chickens are his connection to his mother because her memories are going away. So the chickens remind him of her. So he likes them for that reason. They are something, they're a connection to his mother, but also it's a way for him to show kindness. Larry himself is in a way caged, isn't he? He can't really go anywhere. He's allowed to go from his house to work and drive through to get food, but that's really it. He can't go to church. So in a way, he's in his own cage. The society has put him in a very narrow cage, and he feels for anything else, any other person, any other thing, even an animal, even a dumb chicken. He feels for whatever humanity he might think that they may have. He feels even for the chickens. So it's a way of showing Larry's kindness, but also his connectedness to his mother. That's also part of it.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned that Larry is caged, that society cages him, but isn't it, he could have left, couldn't he? But he didn't. He chose to stay.
I don't think he knew he had the choice to leave. An analogy I love.
Okay, I think we have now officially lost Tom Franklin. At least he's frozen in my screen.
Oh, not only in mine. Okay, I was wondering. He's frozen in my screen as well.
I think maybe this is a sign because it's actually also almost time to wrap up. So maybe we'll just wait for another minute if he manages to show up again. Mm-hmm. And if not, then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
Oh. Okay, now he has lost us. We'll just wait for another 15 seconds, maybe.
But then he said he had to leave for a class at half.
That's also right. He still has class, and he said that it's on the other end of campus. So that's why we need to cut it short today.
Answer.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah. But I mean, we've already covered quite a lot of topics today. So
yes, definitely.
I think, there wouldn't have been a better time for that to happen than now.
Let's call it.
Okay. I think it's a good idea to call it an end now. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so thank you very much for the interesting conversation and also for the numerous questions in the YouTube chat. And I hope you enjoyed the last 90 minutes and can all benefit from it. And if you've missed part of today's event or even still have some questions, just feel free to join our second event on Tuesday, February 7 at 2 p.m. Moreover, I will post this live stream on YouTube after Tuesday so that you can rewatch it. Tell your friends or students who couldn't make it today about it so that they also get a chance to prepare for the Abitur in the best way possible. And if you like what we do and want to know more, you can always follow us on social media and or subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you all for watching. I wish you all the best for your exams and have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.